Well, I mean, this is our last session of the year, 2023. And the third one of three, which is just simply looking at some of the Isaiah passages, which are lectionary choices for Advent. And do a kind of quick resume. But I think it's stuff you all know, so maybe I don't need to do that. And today we're going to look at Isaiah 35, 1 to 10, which we'll read in a minute. But as we've said in previous weeks, there are more than one Isaiah. They keep cropping up. There's the three Isaiahs plus maybe some later editing of the whole book. And also we've looked at how the passages we've read have traditionally been interpreted by Christians as referring to Jesus, but that is based on a kind of misunderstanding of what prophecy is. It isn't future telling. It's about identifying what's going on in the world, what's wrong with the world, and how it could be put right. And if you hear my sermon on Sunday morning, you know that we owe a lot of this to Matthew and Matthew's Gospel, who talks a lot about the fulfillment of prophecies in the coming of Jesus. But that's for Sunday morning, not for this evening. Let's read through the Isaiah passage then, if I can find it. I can't find it. Where is it? Can you see this? Can you now see the Bible reading?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I've got the right one. What should we do? Should we see if we have a volunteer to read, or do we select somebody?
I'm always
or
here.
do we follow tradition?
I'm always here, but you know.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you? I can see you're eating. Would you rather me read it if you're eating?
Oh, I'm okay, as long as
Sure.
I'm not going to be kind of going, an Isaiah nom nom.
As long as your dinner's not getting cold, then yeah.
No, it's not dinner. It's gingerbread, but
right.
That's another story.
That's lovely.
That's really nice, actually. So Isaiah 35, 1 through 10. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty grounds springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveller, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away.
beautiful writing.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I mean, there's a kind of initial problem with the whole passage for anybody trying to do a sort of interpretation of it, which is there's no kind of indication of any kind of historical context. There's no indication why this was being written, what historical events were taking place when Isaiah gave this prophecy or wrote this poem, however you want to look at it. And there's no, it's in the first part of Isaiah. So we'd say this was the first, we would automatically think this was the first Isaiah, who wrote in the 8th century at the time of King Ahaz and King Hezekiah, at a time when the Judah was under threat from Edom and Israel and Assyria, and Jerusalem and Judah itself were threatened with war, which is the context of the first Isaiah when he was writing. But if you go to verse 8, what does that remind you of? A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way.
That's Isaiah 40, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. This is Isaiah 40.
The later source.
Yeah. Comfort, my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. And a voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley should be exalted and every mountain and hill should be made low. As Handel's Messiah and Martin Luther King, quote, So, and that highway was the route back from the Babylonian exile into Israel. So it kind of spans both of the situations. So we don't know whether this is a later thing referring to the Babylonian return, or is it returning about a liberation, or liberation's the wrong word. Is it about actually being saved, delivered from the external threat of other countries?
Sure.
Go on.
I don't like the holy way bit, and only clean people shall walk there, or whatever it says. Unclean shall not travel on it. I don't like the idea of closing down some people. You can't go there, you're dirty, you don't look right. What is that about? Are they worshipping other people, or what's it about?
Well, yes, that's really interesting. It is about the people of Israel. It is talking about the people being a kind of elect, saved group of people. And I can make it even worse for you, Sue. If we go back one chapter, it kind of contrasts. It's the whole chapter really is a kind of contrast with what goes before, which is a strong attack on the people of Edom, who are the people who are threatening. So here in verse 8 of chapter 34 rather, we read, for the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of vindication by Zion's cause, Jerusalem's cause. And the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and her soil into sulfur. Her land shall be become burning pitch. I love this. Night and day it shall not be quenched. The smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lay waste. No one shall pass through it ever and ever. The hawk and the hedgehog shall possess it. The owl and the raven shall live in it. He shall stretch the line of confusion over it and the plummet of chaos over its nobles. They shall name it no kingdom. There and all its princes shall be nothing. Thorns shall grow over its thresholds, nettles and so on. You see, in the haunts of jackals and abode for ostriches, wild cats shall meet with hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other. There too Lilith shall repose. You know who Lilith was? Lilith, I mean, this is the only mention of Lilith in the Bible, but Lilith is supposed to be the second wife of Adam. Adam and Eve are supposed to have divorced. I don't know who did the divorce, but married this monster of a woman called Lilith. Lilith shall possess and find a place to rest, because there shall the owl nest and lay and hatch and brood in its shadow. There too the buzzards shall gather, each one which makes. Seek and read from the book of the Lord. Not one of these shall be missing. None shall be without its mate. For the mouth of the Lord has commanded, and his spirit has gathered them. He has cast the lot to them. His hand has portioned it out for them with the line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation, they shall live in it. That's what's going to happen to Edom. Okay, that's what's going to happen to Edom. But in contrast, this is what's going to happen to Israel. Yeah. The wilderness and the dry land should be glad. Okay, so they're going to be all right. The desert shall rejoice like the crocus. Really interesting.
To a certain extent, this chapter and the one before it are giving the audience what they want to hear. They want to hear that the baddies are going to lose and they're going to win because they're the goodies, and they live in a desert, so there's going to be lots of water. And uncleanness is an issue for them, so there won't be any unclean people there. So it struck me really very forcefully. It's in contrast to what we've heard the previous weeks, which has been much more inclusive potentially. This is actually much less inclusive.
Definitely.
Very interesting, isn't it? I mean, you know, I mean, the poetry kind of deceives you, doesn't it? In a way, because the poetry is so beautiful. For that nice contrast there, the glory of Lebanon should be given to it, and the majesty, and then parallel that with the glory of the Lord and the majesty of our God. You know, so the land Israel, Judah rather, is going to be like these other places, Lebanon, Carmel, and Sharon. Lebanon, we know, is rich with trees and evergreen. The Bible talks about the cedars of Lebanon and so on. Carmel was a kind of natural spring, and Sharon is a fertile plain. Sharon is fertile plain. This is all going to blossom out and be. Whereas the other places, Edom, they're going to be laid waste and destroyed. And the wild animals will be. That's really interesting in the previous chapter. How the wild animals are roaming free in Edom.
There's a lot. I mean, I was going to say, I mean, it's not that useful to us really, but there is a lot of stuff just about the environment, about nature, and you know, the burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. So there is kind of a sense of you know, of difficulty, I suppose, in their environment that which I find quite interesting, and being delivered from that as well.
I think that's a really important point, and I think, you know, eco-theology is kind of picking up on these chapters in Isaiah, as we saw last week.
This is, of course, before the kind of modern sort of climate crisis stuff. Now, I mean, this is, and it's just quite interesting that, I don't know, I just Just,
It is very interesting, actually, and I think we tend to think of environmental issues as being contemporary, only contemporary. But you know, they have come from the earlier civilization. You know, I mean, humanity's always been messing with nature. You know, and nature itself has always created, you know, hostile environments. You know.
Yeah. And so you sort of get this sense almost of the political and the environmental all kind of being sort of oppressive in the society, which I think is quite interesting, and the fact that it's so kind of there's such a full sense of difficult living that embraces, you know, that what they not embraces, sorry, that encompasses war, poverty, environmental stuff. It's quite interesting. Anyway, sorry.
No. I mean, go to verse 9. You know, no lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there.
That's very different from last week, where the lion was there, but it lay down happily with, well, it wasn't lion and lamb, but the wild animals lay down happily with each other, and no one was afraid of them. Here it just won't be there.
Yes.
So in a sense, whereas before it was about reconciliation, everyone coming together as one for Israel, this is about Israel being distinct, and all the bad things being dumped on their enemies, and all the good things being given to them.
That's right.
So it's that's very that actual vision is very different. They're going to be safe, but not because the animals there's harmony between the animals and them, but because the animals won't be there.
But I think, you know, for ancient Israel and Judah, I mean, they did not hunt. They were not people who went out hunting wild animals. I mean, they had domestic animals, so that, you know, the domestic animals that were referred to in the passage that we looked at last week, you know, the cow and the lamb and, you know, all the rest of it, you know, were the ones that they were threatened by the wild animals. So the wild animals were a threat. So, you know, I mean, in this ideal ecotopia that you've got here, there are no beasts, there are no wild animals, you know, there's no threat. But I think, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, it's a very hopeful passage, isn't it? One of hope for people.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But I think Harley's point there about the political and the environmental, you know, who are the redeemed and who are the ransomed? You know, when we hear redeemed, we tend to think of people who have had personal salvation or been set free from some sin that they've committed or think they've committed or whatever. But the redeemed and the ransomed shall return. If they're returning from Babylon, they've been set free from exile and captivity. If they are just recovering from a period of war and threat, then they've been released from that threat and that danger. So, quite apart from the goodies and baddies, you know, kind of stuff that's going on here, the Edomites are the baddies and the Judeans are the goodies. But there is a sense that, you know, people have been set free from dangerous and threatening situations. Should we, I mean, we've looked at the first little paragraph. Is there anything in there? I mean, it is just this contrast, isn't it, between the previous chapter and then the wilderness of the dry land, which is current state of Jerusalem, is going to blossom, and we've got this parallel between the glory of Lebanon and Carmel and Sharon, which would then become Judah, and that Jerusalem will see the glory of God, the majesty of our God. So what comes? That's an interesting point, actually. again, from what Holly was saying, that, you know, the kind of the environmental change is seen as coming from, is the glory of God and the majesty of God.
Oh, what is it? Sorry, say it again.
Well, I mean, he does this, you know, parallelism, you know, which we call it in Hebrew, in the Hebrew poetry. So in the line, you've got the glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, and then in 2 lines later, they shall see the glory of the Lord. So the parallel is the glory of Lebanon that's given to it is actually the glory of God, and the same goes. The majesty of Carmel that's given them is the majesty of our God.
So the kind of prospering of certain lands is the majesty of God.
Yeah, I mean this well, more about the transformation of the land, the transformation of the environment is actually a transformation into, you know, the presence of God.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, you know, what is it about weak hands and feeble knees? Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees.
Again, it's a hopeful thing, isn't it? It's saying to people, you know, you could be better than this sort of thing. I will help you there.
Well, I guess you've also got this
Don't fear.
another sort of parallelism there in the poetry, because the next verse is, say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. So hands and knees give you strength. You know, I mean, you need them. Hands and knees give you strength. And then, so it says, if you're of a fearful heart, be strong. You know, strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble. Say to those who have a fearful heart, which is, you know, the mind, the will, be strong, do not fear. So there's kind of big, strong of encouragement here to people who are living under some kind of threat and danger.
And this quite full understanding of well, you know, you've got hands, knees, and hearts. So it's, you know, our bodies and our hearts and our minds. And if you go to something like, you know, if you go to some of the writings that are commonly attributed to Solomon, I mean, he's big on the mind. So there's full sense of what it means to be strengthened. Quite interesting.
And there, yeah, I mean, and I guess if you are living in danger, you know, you've got to have resolve, haven't you? You know, I mean, in a sense, you know, people living in challenging times, you need to keep your strength, you know, keep your commitment, yeah.
Keep warm.
Keep warm, yes, especially today. But then you get, you know, that again, linking back to what we were seeing in the previous chapter. Here's your God, he will come in vengeance with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. The vengeance, who's the vengeance on and who's the recompense on?
Be vengeance on your enemy, on Israel's enemy, on Judah's enemies.
Yeah, exactly.
Recompense to them for what's been done to them.
Yes, he will come and save you.
And potentially, I mean, if this reads as if it's written after the exile, which it doesn't fit in with this part of Isaiah, but it reads like it, because then you've got something very clear to have avenged and made up for you.
Yeah, and I think that's why you know, the scholars, you know, think that it's, academics think that it's the whole thing has been, you know, has these kind of demarcations of first, second, third Isaiah, but that it's all been edited at some point after the exile. It's been edited, so maybe this bit comes from a later part and it's slotted in or whatever. But the point is that we don't know.
I mean, I guess one point may be the previous chapter's warning, and this part of Isaiah is about warning them maybe when they put it all together, they felt they shouldn't have a warning without a sort of more positive chapter. So maybe this section was put after the previous one precisely to correct a balance, because although you just have the warning in its own right at the time, given that hope did come, maybe they felt that in the final version it was important that you didn't just have the bare warning without any note of hope and recompense. So I this is only on the top of my head. I haven't but it does occur to me that would be the sort of thing you might do if you were putting together a book. You would keep it in broad sections, chronological sections, but you might temper some of them more. And that previous chapter is pretty grim, so you might temper that with something a bit more positive if it's a bit out of chronological order.
Yes, but in a way, but the message, between the two chapters is sort of clear, isn't it? That the other lot get the vengeance, and Judah gets the recompense, and they get the salvation, whereas the other lot get the damnation. But as with all of these things, you can sort of try and struggle away to get the historical context, but which is useful to get an understanding. But you read them in other contexts, and you're supposed to read them in other contexts, and you're supposed to read new things into them out of context and read through your own. Should we read on? Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. What do we make of that verse?
Well, it's very hopeful. It's good. It's nice.
I mean, I think nowadays we might want to look at, I think I think Sue picked it up right at the very beginning. The unseen shall not walk there, and no traveller, no fools. Our view of disabilities is kind of different from how things were seen in biblical times. That in biblical times the normative body was alive, whole, male, and had no abnormalities or illnesses. And in a way, this is kind of reflected in this. To be blind is, or deaf, or lame, or speechless. I mean, these are things that have to be put right. But I don't know what you think, Sue, but this kind of view of disability is changing considerably, I think.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's tough. To be disabled is very tough. Yeah. Crazy. So yeah.
I mean, it's such a beautiful passage. You don't want to sneer at the sentiment in it. But you can also see the problematic.
It would be very interesting to have a discussion with either a blind or deaf person about this passage and how they relate to it, and what they just how they respond to it, react to it, because it's very difficult for those of us who aren't to sort of understand that and to see how they might read it and the offence they might take from it, because in a sense, well, I guess we just don't know, but it'd be very interesting.
Well, I think when you sort of relate things like blindness to characteristics, so you are blind to the truth.
Yes.
Those kind of phrases that are used, are the ones that cause offence. Have you heard of somebody called John Hull?
Oh yes.
He was my tutor actually a long time ago.
Oh, really? Gosh.
Yeah, before he went blind.
Oh.
But he was a fantastic theologian who became blind and wrote about all of that, how the language of the church, is not helpful to people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And Donald Eady has written a book, hasn't he, Sue?
Yes, he has. Yeah. It's about overcoming pain, how to overcome pain, because he's in great pain all the time. That's really hard for him. I don't think it's resolved the book, but just put out how he was feeling, really.
Right.
How he was coping with pain.
Right.
There is a film, Vaughan, which I've not watched. I've got it on Google Play, but called Notes on Blindness, which is all about John Hull.
Right. Yes, I've seen that. Yeah, we showed it here at Union Chapel.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
Yeah.
I must watch it. It reminded me I got it. I forgot I had it.
That'd be really interesting. I've heard of it, but I've never. It was relatively recent, was it? That one?
2016.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Still relatively recent, I guess. But
Yeah.
I must watch that. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you for.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, I think you get the sense of the passage that it is again another example of this transformation. And this transformation is, we've seen it's taking place in the physical environment. It's also taking place in the bodies of people. Yeah. Water shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become like a pool in the thirsty ground. Springs of water, the haunt of jackals shall become a swamp of grass. And that's all the same stuff, isn't it? Restoration of elements, elements that are missing, where there's desert, you need water, I'm just checking something out. I mean, he in another passage in chapter 32, he uses the same kind of imagery. Until a spirit from on high is poured out on us, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field, and the fruitful field is deemed a forest. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. The effect of righteousness will be peace, and the results of righteousness quietness and trust forever. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings and in quiet resting places. The forest will disappear completely, and the city will be utterly laid low. Happy will you be who sow beside every stream, who let the ox and the donkey rage freely. Yeah. So it's the same kind of idea that runs through Isaiah in all kinds of places. This idea of the wild animals being either removed or being accommodated by domestic animals, and the dangerous environment being and difficult environment being transformed. Yeah. Right. So what do we make about the last section then? This highway.
Well, I agree with Sue. I don't feel comfortable with it at all, and it's very exclusive.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a tension within the whole of the Bible between exclusivism and inclusivism, and we find that in the church. Some churches are terribly exclusive, and others are very inclusive. I guess just this one verse alone could actually spark very interesting conversation between those two different views, and why some people feel that it's got to be exclusive, and why they feel it's so important to exclude other people and define themselves very, very clearly, and why others feel that that's not an imperative. In fact, the imperative is the reverse. And it's like the debate you sometimes have as to whether with church it's about belonging or believing. And some people say, well, you make it a place where people feel they belong, and then the believing comes later. And other people say, well, you can't actually belong there unless you believe. And so you have two completely different approaches to how you even try and attract other people to a church.
I suppose I sort of have two questions about it. I mean, for one thing, the unclean, is that just people who are not Israelites? And also, but also that you've got this line, no traveler, not even fools shall go astray. And I'm wondering how inclusive that is, or is it just God's people who are fools won't go astray, or etc.
Well, there's a sense of it being a new Exodus, isn't there? I mean, I think that idea of the procession, the route, the people coming back to the promised land. So it's about a restoration of the situation before exile or before this threat, and it's just taking people to relive the liberation from slavery and the route, the path, the journey into the promised land. The redeemed are also a kind of a link to slavery there. You know, the ransom, the people set free. So it is really a liberation passage. I mean, I think but the difficulty, not the difficulty, but I mean the reality of it is that it is about the people of God. It is about the people, you know, the Hebrews being set free from the threats and the dangers of their environment. I mean, that's, you know, that both their kind of physical environment, but more importantly here, the actual kind of military threats that imposed against them, or the captivity.
But isn't the point that, I mean, there were so many people who could have been unclean. So it could be someone with leprosy, it could be a woman at a certain time in the month, it could be somebody whose relative has recently died. I mean, there's so many that could be cut out. And surely for us, the point is that's irrelevant now, really. You know, and I'm not kind of wanting to make it sugary sweet, because obviously there are problems with the text, but surely the point for us as a church is no one's unclean. We're all God's people. And we all have the opportunity to the only way you can be unclean is for you to choose to be yourself, to deliberately exclude yourself, I suppose, from it. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not interested. I'm not even sure about that, to be honest. But that's how I would see it. But the problem is that you're right. I mean, so many religious institutions and faith groups do choose to exclude and say, oh, they're all unclean, so they can't be part of it. But that's not our job. And I don't know if this is relevant, but I was struck with something I was reading this morning in the book I'm working through for Advent. I'd never realized that, but when the coin is presented to Jesus in the temple and they're trying to trick him, you know, whose money is this? Should we pay it, or should we pay taxes to Caesar, or whatever? That's actually really offensive, because it's actually nothing to do with the temple, and it's unclean in the temple because of the kind of money it is. So for the priests to even be holding it in the temple breaks all their own rules, which is why Jesus reacts as he does. You know, so it's kind of, I think we lose the anger in the way we read that passage. He's actually really quite furious with them. You know, give to Caesar what's his. Don't bring it in here. And to God what is God's.
And lose that sense of Jewishness in how Jesus is, you know, portrayed and how he acts in Matthew. I mean, you know, that kind of, I think,
But it's bringing that Jewishness, that purity into a place where it's accessible to all of us. If we're not stupid,
I think Jewish commentators tend to say that the Christians really overemphasize the purity laws and the, you know, the holiness code. That we kind of go on and on about it, and they're not that bothered. You know, I mean, it's it wasn't such a big deal. It wasn't as central as we kind of make it to be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hope that's true, actually. I mean, in a way, because it would be really helpful to us. But they see this as, you know, Christians kind of hitting Jewish, you know, the Old Testament, you know, faith, you know, too hard. And that a lot of it was there for very sensible, very practical, you know, hygiene reasons, you know.
I did have a quick look just now at the Jewish Study Bible, which is it's not conservative. I mean, it's mainstream scholars. And they say about verse 8, since God would personally accompany the exiles, they would have to be in a state of ritual purity. So it's like sort of saying, yeah, so that's their take on it. So you'd have to be pure because God's there. So that's sort of not quite what we want them to say.
Can we go back to the Garden of Eden? I mean, literally in this sense, in that, you know, Adam and Eve chose to make themselves unclean.
Yes.
And they're the ones who hid from God. He didn't hide from them. He came looking for them. And I think that's the thing that's really what we should be applying here. Whether that's what's meant in this text or not, I think that's God's way, that we hide from him. He doesn't hide from us.
Well, I think Isaiah's, a lot of the ecological stuff in Isaiah is about a return to Eden. You know, I mean, it is about the restoration, not just of Israel, Judah into the promised land, and the Exodus returning, but it's actually a restoration of paradise as well. I mean, that's what's kind of being promised and hoped for. I mean, interestingly, the Jewish scholars, I think, tend to understand this passage as relating to the destruction caused by the Assyrians, Sennacherib, because that is the story which follows in chapter 36 and 37, is the story of the attack by the Assyrians on Jerusalem. So they see this as being very specifically about a historical event that was taking place, but they also read it as messianic as well, sort of being about a time when Jews will return to Jerusalem. So medieval Jewish scholars, you know, talked about, you know, as now Jews have returned to Israel, but in for the 2,000 years, then the expectation and the hope was of the return, and they see this as being a future prophecy of not of the Messiah, I think, but of the return to. Rather suspicious of the Christian interpretation of verse 5 and 6, which, as we know, in Matthew 11, Jesus quotes this. If you remember when John the Baptist comes and he says, "Tell John what you have seen." So, I think just one last thought that I have, and then we can just see what we think about the passage overall, is that there's a kind of unspoken suffering in this. You know, that the transformation is needed because the suffering is there. So we may recoil a bit at the anger, and recoil a bit at the ferocity of the prophecy in chapter 34 against Edom, because it doesn't sound very nice. But you get the impression, if you unpack it, that you've got a people who are in a pretty dire state and desperate need for everything to change, for their own bodies to change, for the physical environment to change, for the enemy to go away. And you look at the beauty of the passage, and you have to think, well, why is Isaiah offering and talking about that as a thing of promise? That suffering must be underlying it all, and this is a kind of offering an alternative, a hopeful alternative to the present mess that they were in.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose when one thing is quite sort of oppressive, then everything can become oppressive in a sense in your environment. Like if you're already dealing with horrible poverty, then you're gonna then the environment becomes a greater threat to you. Wild animals even might become a greater threat to you. Ill health might become a greater threat to you. So you sort of do get this full sense of almost reality itself being against you, I think, when you're suffering a certain way. But
I think that's spot on. There was a little bit on Peston last night about the link between poverty and depression.
Yeah.
Statistically, and I think those who can't afford to pay their heating bills are 60% of people who can't afford their heating bills are suffering from some form of depression statistically. Whereas those who can, it's 17%. I mean, and I know that's a rather simplistic thing, but it's such a key thing, and it's so talked about in our culture now. That it almost becomes self-reinforcing, doesn't it? But I think you're absolutely right, Holly. I think everything then seems against you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it also seems to me this bit's so reminiscent, or obviously T.S. Eliot picked up on it, but The Wasteland, his conversion poem, there's so much imagery in this that he takes directly into the wasteland, about the crocus and about the desert and about even the singing that he hears in the distance, and the kind of waiting for rain. The burning sand shall become a pool is so like a line from The Wasteland.
I've forgotten that.
And it's that for me, that's one of the things that led me to Christianity, actually. So it's always kind of been deep within me, but it kind of is just, and he was incredibly depressed at that time too. That's kind of why he came to faith. I think it's if we can treat it that way, if we can treat it metaphorically, this is an incredibly beautiful passage and very powerful.
Are the lectionary compilers right to make it an Advent reading?
Whoa. Don't know. That's a tough one. I think it's because it makes this almost too reductive, isn't it? Maybe it's because we don't treat Advent right. We don't really understand what it's for.
I mean, the thing is this foretelling Jesus? No, it's dealing with a historical kind of context and situation. But do we have the right to read Jesus into this?
Well,
do we have the right to see this as something we recognize in the gospel story?
Depends what you mean by the right. I think personally we have the right.
Yeah.
I don't think we have the right to impose it on others.
No, that's a different thing. But does the church have the right to say, we recognize in this beauty of this passage, we recognize something of the beauty of the gospel?
Yeah.
Yes, if we then make it an inclusive gospel.
I think.
And I think if we don't imply that it was written with that in mind,
Yes.
I think it's perfectly okay to say these ancient texts help us to understand Christ, but not that these ancient texts foretold Christ knowingly or unknowingly. Because I think that is going too far. But I think to say that in the same way that any, I mean, in a sense, as I think I said last week, the passage last week, I don't think its meaning can be exhausted in anything, and I think you can apply some of the imagery there to all sorts of scenarios, and all sorts of idealistic hopes for the future. So you don't have to. And so I think in the same way, this passage can have multiple meanings and resonances, but without implying that one is the right one and the other ones aren't.
Yeah.
And it brings them to life as well. It means sort of that it's perfectly okay for Matthew to use it, but that's not the definitive and unique interpretation of it.
You can sort of you can sort of say that. I don't know. I have this feeling that you can kind of say that something might have multiple correct interpretations, and so our interpretation is in some sense correct, but that doesn't suddenly mean that our interpretation just fully defines what this is.
Yes,
right. But it doesn't make it incorrect either. I mean, there's a lot that's kind of in here, and in some ways, the Gospels do sort of follow on from these prophecies, and in some ways, this actually promises more and promises something very, very broad. So yeah, anyway.
And these passages were deep in the consciousness of Jesus, deep in the consciousness of the gospel writers, so they informed, what happened later.
Yeah. So I mean, Jesus was acting in such a sense that he was very, very indebted to this. I mean, he was acting as someone who was desperate to follow on from and you could argue maybe felt that parts of the church weren't at that time, and so anyway, you could argue that.
But it's also in the poetic form. So poetic form means it should have layered meanings.
Yes.
And sometimes the poet hasn't got a clue what they're writing. I always remember there used to be these things called poetry night events where poets would go and talk to students about poems that were on the syllabus that they'd written. And I remember a poet called Imtiaz Darker, who's a lovely woman, and she'd written this poem about her kitchen exploding in a hurricane. And I can't remember what the student said, but it was a student in the audience who said, "Does it mean this?" And she stopped for a moment and looked at him and said, "Well, it didn't, but it does now."
That's great.
I think that can apply to this.
That's a good ending point. That's exactly. I'm just thinking, after New Year, we shall resume, I hope. There was a request from one of the congregation who hasn't actually joined these Bible studies, but she said she'd like something that was about an introduction to the Bible itself. So, and I don't know. I mean, no.
No, sorry.
I mean, we could do. Harley was suggesting we could do a kind of one-off for her and anybody who's interested in that.
Yeah.
But it did make me wonder whether or not there was something around this sort of the big picture of the Bible, and how the Bible came to be what it is, and why we have these books in the Bible and not others.
Yes.
I mean, that's a question that kind of emerges. Or would you like to select and think about another particular part of the Bible that you'd like us to look at?
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes.
I'm kidding. No, no, I mean,
Sue, you're going to.
You're too early for a midlife crisis,
Yeah.
Harley.
I've been there for my whole life. I know.
Sue, sorry.
I really like the idea of looking at whether what forms the Bible and what was excluded and what was kept in, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's also.
Sorry, Sue was wanting to say something. I think.
It's fine. I just want at some point to have the Jewish and Islam
Yes.
people back again.
Yeah, I know.
And don't forget.
I won't forget.
Well, what would be interesting actually to have a Jewish evening on the Hebrew Bible, because in a sense that's our Old Testament,
Oh.
and they all do it very differently. What we call the historical books, they call the former prophets, and that has a huge implication. So it'd be really interesting to hear their take on the Hebrew Bible, because that would be,
well, I'll sort of look and see what we can do before Lent, and then our theme to Lent we're thinking of is something like faith under fire, and maybe in the program have a series on solidarity, the meaning of solidarity through the Bible, and what the Bible teaches us about solidarity in our contemporary world.
There is a new book coming out, by the way, if anybody's coming out, I've heard next year, only in January, called Jesus the Refugee.
All right, who's that by?
I can't, hang on, maybe to tell you, if not, I'll have to email you, but it just struck me, it's an American book, but it's really asking whether Jesus as a refugee would how he could get on in our current system, but it just seemed a very relevant title, talking about solidarity.
Yeah, there were no passport controls in Egypt at the time.
Oh, that's true.
No wall.
Oh no, it's Twitter. Sorry, I may not be able to find it, but
good. Well, we'll put something together anyway. Maybe start again a couple of weeks after the new year, if that's okay.
Yeah, have a good break, Vaughan. Thanks for all you've done. Thanks for all your work. It's been so good. No, it's been really good.
Really
And thanks,
nice.
thanks, Peter, as well, for your efforts.
Yes.
my pleasure. The author of the book is D. Glenn Butner, Butner Jr. And it's called Jesus the Refugee, Ancient Injustice and Modern Solidarity. It comes out in January.
Okay.
I just thought that struck me when we were talking about solidarity. That's it's where we got to show solidarity, I'm sure, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Oh, I don't want to go on too much longer, but I think with the solidarity thing, when we started talking about it, we kind of thought the kind of Christians and the persecution thing, but then we wanted to expand it, and so we thought, well, how about also the way that the church is persecuted. And then it kind of eventually became this sort of interfaith solidarity thing. I just wanted to ask Vaughan, actually, are we moving away from that to an even broader sense of what solidarity, or is it going to be sort of interfaith solidarity?
Well, I think we can have different components in the Lent program, and one component can be how does the Bible inform how we should be in solidarity? Because I think we're in lots of situations where Christians say they're persecuted, that very often they are persecuted alongside other people. They're in situations where there are intense human rights abuses, not only for Christians but for other people as well. And some of the sort of more evangelical groups just talk about Christian solidarity just with Christians and Christians supporting each other. Whereas actually, I think, we need to start to think about how, as Christians, we are in solidarity with each other, but also with other peoples who suffer under the same kind of oppressive forces.
Years ago, I remember a book called Solidarity with Victims, and that seemed to be a very good sort of imperative.
Okay. You're
idea.
in charge of the reading list, Peter.
Happy Christmas. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Yeah,
See
you
you.
need to go, yeah.
Next
Okay,
year.
I went over time.
Happy Christmas.
Okay, you
Bye,
take
bye.
care. Yeah.
See you in 2020.
See you 23.
Yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
2023. Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you.
everyone.
And,
24.
okay, take care. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.